Hi Year 12 Economics, it's Miss O'Neill here, and this is a short presentation on tariffs and the tariff diagram. You might want to just start by thinking about the effects of a tariff. We've already done some work on the effects of a tariff, including the effect on price for consumers, the effect on quantity in the domestic market, the effect on domestic producers, on overseas producers, the effects on government revenue, then the broader effects, the retaliation effect, whereby if a country places tariffs on the goods from another country, then that other country might retaliate and place tariffs against our products. Also, those big picture impacts, global impacts in terms of the global allocation of resources, global production, and global trade. So you just have a bit of a think about those effects, and maybe pause this recording while you have a think about that. Okay, so why bother about the effects of a tariff? Well, there's a number of reasons why we need to know how to outline the effects of a tariff and how to read a tariff diagram. A tariff diagram is a way of illustrating the impacts of a tariff. If you can draw it quickly, it'll help you answer questions on tariffs and protection in HSC exams, short response and essays. It's useful for multiple choice questions like this one here from the 2014 HSC. Questions 19 and 20 were on a tariff diagram. It can also appear in short response questions. It's a pretty common question in the HSC. So it's pretty important for us to be able to understand tariff diagrams. This one here you might not be able to see very well, but that doesn't matter because you'll be able to see some in the not too distant future. So we'll be having a look at tariff diagrams, how to read and interpret them, and then I'll sort of walk you through a tariff diagram on barbecues, and then you'll be doing one on teddy bears. Okay, so next step. So here is a tariff diagram, and this one is on tariffs on barbecues. With a tariff diagram, we always start, you start with a domestic demand and supply curve. So if you have a look at the demand and supply curves on your screen, you've got a domestic demand curve and a domestic supply curve. So what that shows, if we just ignore the other lines on the graph for the moment, basically, if we had a closed economy with no trade at all, then you would simply have domestic demand and domestic supply interacting at equilibrium. You would have a price of, say, in this example, you might have a price of, say, $600. Excuse my dodgy writing there. However, if we had a situation of free trade and we accepted the world price in our economy, what that means is that we're looking at like a big supply and demand diagram out there in the big wide world. Okay, and so you just have this giant supply and demand curves that would interact and would actually interact at a lower equilibrium price than what you have in the closed domestic economy. So given that Australia is a small open economy, if we are exposed to perfectly free trade, then we simply have to accept the price, and in fact we would be called a price taker, which means we just accept the world price. And so the world price for barbecues in this example is, you guessed it, $200. So at $200, local producers aren't so happy. They'd like to produce, closed economy, it'd be $600 a barbecue, right? At $200, what you do is you just have a look, you go across to the domestic supply curve and you see, well, at that price, local producers, domestic producers are only going to produce 500 barbecues. So there's only like maybe one or two producers that will decide that they're going to stay in the market. So they'll only produce 500 barbecues. But of course, at the lower price, domestic consumers are like, you beauty, I want to buy at that lower price. So domestic demand is going to be 1,500 barbecues. Of course, demand greater than supply. How do you make up the shortfall? from E to F, or from 500 to 1500, 1000 barbecues are imported. That's if we have perfectly free trade. Just imagine, however, barbecue businesses, barbecues galore, or whoever in Australia decide to lobby the government, or perhaps the government uses the infant industry argument. They want to develop the barbecue industry in Australia, perhaps protect domestic jobs. Then they might decide to whack a tariff on top of that world price. So basically, you've got here a tariff that raises the price of barbecues from $200 to $300. So what happens in that instance is the tariff isn't paid by the domestic producers, it's actually only paid by the overseas producers, the global producers. It's paid on the imports. So domestic producers still get to charge $500, but they get to pocket that extra money. So before the tariff, the price was $200. After the tariff, the price is $500. So we start seeing immediately that there are some impacts of this tariff. And this is the beauty of the tariff diagram, is that it just shows you these impacts, and it makes it really easy to explain the effects of a tariff. So straight away you see, well, obviously price goes up. So if we have a bit of a scroll down to our worksheet, we can see price before the world tariff was, of course, $200. Sorry, that's the price before the tariff. Price after the tariff, so the world price was $200. After the tariff, tax goes up, price now goes up to $500. So there's price done, impact. Okay, the quantity bought by consumers before the tariff. So before the tariff, remember, you had the world price $200. You go across to the domestic demand curve. They get what they want, $1,500. All right, so consumers got to buy 1,500 barbecues before the tariff. What about after the tariff? The tariff comes in, $500. Oops, $500. Go across the demand curve. Now, higher price, less quantity demanded, law of demand. So now only 1,300 barbecues are bought by local consumers. What about revenue to domestic producers? So before the tariff, domestic producers are selling 500 barbecues at $200 a pop. So their total revenue is this box here. So that's $200 times 500 barbecues is $100,000. So $100,000 before the tariff is in place goes to domestic producers. After the tariff, local supply increases to 800, and those local producers are getting $500. So 800 times 500 is $400,000. So straight away you can see, well, not 14, $400,000. Straight away you can see why the local producers would be pretty interested in lobbying for a tariff on those on barbecues. Now I'm just going to clean up the diagram a little bit. Ta-da! As you can see, the diagram is now cleaner and I've moved. Okay, so quantity of imports before the tariff. All right, so before the tariff means the world price. So we look at, so before the tariff, the world price, quantity supplied, 500. Quantity demanded, 1,500. So the actual amount imported, EF, or in other words, 1,500 minus 500 was 1,000 barbecues. Quantity of imports after the tariff, well, price goes up, $500. Quantity supplied goes up, 800. Quantity demanded goes down, 1,300 minus 800, 500. So there's a decrease in imports, so the impact on global producers, first of all, is that they get to only sell us 500 barbecues instead of 1,000 barbecues. And further impacts on importers is the revenue that goes to importers. So we see that before the tariff, if importers are selling 1,000 barbecues and they're getting $200 per barbecue, then their revenue would have been $200,000. After the tariff, now this is interesting and this is where you need to be careful. After the tariff, quantity imported goes down to 500. The importers are still only getting $200. So it's 500 times 200, so it's $100,000. So their importers lose out $100,000. They halve their revenue from selling barbecues to Australia. The importers, you see, this bit up here, they don't get that. They pay that to the government in tax. So the government is actually receiving this amount of revenue here. If you like, let's colour it in blue for the government. Okay, so they're receiving for each 500 of those 500 barbecues imported, they're receiving $300. Okay, so the government is receiving $350,000 in tax revenue. And so I've just moved the diagram down a little bit so we can fit it all in. So what did we say? $350,000 in tax revenue to the government. So the government obviously wins out here. So the winners for the tariffs on the barbecues, obviously local producers or domestic producers. I'll have to practice this. And the government in terms of government revenue. Okay. Losers, well, local or domestic consumers, global producers, of course, if you went back to the winners, you might then be able to extrapolate that. Okay, so if local producers and the government win, you could probably say also domestic employees. All right, you could say domestic employees are going to win as well. So by the same token, losers, I guess you could say as well, the global economy, free trade advocates are going to lose. In the end, you can develop your argument more further to say that if you start then looking at those bigger picture impacts on global resource allocation, on world output and world trade, that is really going to decline as well. So the tariff diagram, however, allows you to pinpoint and I guess quantify and illustrate these first effects on price, quantity, and then revenue to domestic producers, global or overseas producers, and government. And then we can make further analytical statements after that. And so that, my friends, is the tariff diagram. Now it's your turn. This tariff diagram is all about teddy bears, Sydney's favourite teddy bear. So now it's your turn to have a go at the tariff diagram in terms of teddy bears. Good luck. So just some further instruction there. What you'll be doing is you'll be filling out this your tariff diagram on teddy bears, which I have either given to you or sent to you, depending on what format we use this video in. And then you will be submitting that to me either in by hand, or you'll send it through to me as a document over the net. Okay, good luck, and let's find out about the impacts on tariffs on teddy bears.